Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Coloma and the expansion New Prospects. Now this is a slightly different review than normal in the sense that I'll be reviewing the final base game of Coloma that's been out for quite some time, as well as the prototype, everything subject to change, all rules and components, all that stuff, of New Prospects. So I'm reviewing both a half a finished product and half a almost finished product, work in progress. I'll also have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. It's going to be over on GameFound for New Prospects. Speaking of which, disclaimer that I do work for GameFound, take that into account. This review is not paid for by GameFound, sponsored by GameFound, or any way, shape, or form. This is Final Frontier Games sending me the game to review both the base game and the expansion. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into it. I will explain the bundle of how it works together, and then towards the end there'll be a timestamp of what the actual differences that New Prospects brings to the table are. So, to that end, in Coloma, you are adventuring across 3 rounds, 3 years, 1848, 1849, and 1850, the years of the gold rush, as you try to figure out how to predict which actions you take by looking at this rondel that's going to be slowly turning around the board as you go, and you're going to have 3 rounds of play, again, 3 years. Each year is going to have 5 rounds, and in each round you're trying to bid on, not really bid, but secretly decide where you are placing your frontier, your pioneer, in order to take various actions. That's the core idea, which I understand is a lot without a lot of context. What you do need to know in the game is you're going to want resources. You're going to want horses, and the reason you want horses is so that you can wander around this track over here, adventuring in the frontier. You're going to want gold, because gold is going to be important to building buildings, but it's also going to be important to building bridges, as well as waterfalls in the game as well, so you want those resources. You're going to need money, because money is another essential component towards building buildings, waterfalls, and bridges as well, so you need money, you need gold, and the third component you're going to need is a lot of these dudes over here, because again, those are required for both your buildings, your waterfalls, and your bridges in the game, which are 3 of the things that you're primarily trying to build because they're going to be a huge source of points. So that's kind of what you need over here. So you need horses, you need dudes, you need money, and you need gold. You need to get your hands on all of those things, and so the puzzle is how do you efficiently get your hands on those things, and then how do you trade them in for all those other fun stuff that I mentioned already. To that end, across those rounds of play, across the 3 years, you're going to have this little dial over here that's going to be turning every single round. And every single round, the first thing it does is it turns to the new area. It starts off in 5 at the beginning of the game, it turns to over here, and then you can activate the barker tile over here, doing the event that's in this location. All players over here are right now going to get 2 dudes to add to the supply from the general supply to their lodge over here that they can put down and start using for their abilities, and at this point, anyone who has a tent in this area can double the reward. So all the players right now have a tent, which means they're all going to take 4 dudes instead of 2. That's going to be true as you move around the board over here, getting a gold, as you draw cards up into your hand, as you take money, and as you trade gold in for victory points. Those are the 5 events that will happen every single round as you turn the tile. From there, you're going to go ahead and secretly decide how you want to place your pioneer on the track. Every player taking the little rondel dial over here, secretly choosing where they think they want to go. I'm going to go to 4 over here, flipping the tile face down as you try to secretly decide and bluff out where you need to go, because you may want things to bust, you may not want things to bust. We'll talk about that soon. We'll have the other player go ahead and do their tile, and then everyone will go ahead and reveal their tile. And this is where you're going to have Buster over here is always going to be on the tile following the Barker tile over here. You go ahead and reveal. We have a 4 and a 3, so I'll go ahead and place on 4. We'll go ahead and place the purple person over on 3, and right now, because it's an even number of people, meaning there's no clear majority, the bust tile is going to stay where it is. On the other hand, let's say you did have a clear majority, let's say purple and red were both here, putting 2 pioneers in this area, then that region would bust and you would get fewer benefits from that region. You'd still get the bottom benefit, but you wouldn't get the inner circle benefit that would bust instead, although you do get benefits for busting in this game. You are going to get benefits for busting, so sometimes you do want things to bust, sometimes you don't. That's the trade-off you guys have to figure out as you build out your tableau, but that's the sequence over there. Everyone goes ahead and secretly selects a region. You have Buster in the region following the Barker tile, which helps ensure that's more likely to bust. Not entirely likely. The trade-off is many people won't necessarily go there because they think it's more likely, which might actually make it less likely. But then if you go there, it might make it more likely. You can see where this starts to go over here. But then once you resolve that over there, you're going to, starting from region 1, go round and around and have everyone activate their tiles, taking their benefits, again, possibly taking less benefits or fewer benefits if there's a busted tile over there. To that end, the regions over here, let's go ahead and explain the regions as we go through this. Then we'll explain a bit more about busting. But the regions over here are this starting region over here simply give you the shovel and the wheelbarrow symbol, and those are primarily used to activate cards. Players are going to have their Sutter's Mill over here, which activates whenever you do the shovel, you're going to get 2 cards, and whenever you do the wheelbarrow, you'll get 1 gold. And then as you build up more cards, you're going to get more symbols. So for example, on these 3 tiles here, I can go ahead and take the benefits of wherever this marker is, taking the benefits on these cards. So as you build up more cards, you'll get more benefits by activating that initial area. The second area area over here, and again, in general, if this busts, then you do not get the bottom symbol, you'll only get the shovel. But the flip side is, whenever things bust, you're going to advance all markers on cards. So for example, if this area busted, I'd move these markers up, and that would make it a stronger benefit the next time I activate those cards. I'd also be moving a marker up this waterfall track over here. They're going to be slowly moving along this track over here with your marker, starting off here, and getting various benefits and possibly death and discoverables all along the way as you move along this track. The second area on the board is going to be how you build bridges and waterfalls. Over here you can build bridges and waterfalls. Basically you look at the bridges and waterfalls, it's printed on your player board as well, but you can always, meaning even if this busts, you'll be able to build a bridge or waterfall for its hammer cost. The hammer cost is going to cost you dudes as well as money, and you can go ahead and build any waterfall, taking a waterfall and placing it down onto your tableau and getting the benefits, potentially benefits, as you cross it. You can get points for that at the end of the game, so you can get points underneath each waterfall you build, but also it gives you an easier pathway. So if you're moving along this track over here, you can go ahead and move that there and get a faster pathway as well as benefits along the way, so you kind of want to build out those waterfalls. Alternatively, you can build out bridges, and bridges are going to help you because if you build a bridge over here, you have to pay the bridge again for its hammer cost, and bridges are going to give you different point scoring benefits. You're going to have a variety of bridges you could use, and in every game you're going to select 6 of those different bridges, putting them into play, and that will give players different things to vie for as far as how they build things out. Are you focusing on having a bunch of dead cowboys in a fight? Do you want to focus on having a bunch of barrels, maybe a handful of cards? There's all these things you can do that will give you points, chunks of points for having certain things that you've accomplished, but the bridges have to go over the waterfalls. If you did not bust, then you'll also be able to build a bridge or waterfall for its saw cost. So you can get 2 builds this round, and the saw cost is also going to cost dues, but it's going to cost gold instead of money. So you can do one, either, or both if you do that. The next location on the board is going to be building cards from your hands. Same idea, you have a hammer cost and a saw cost, and if you look at cards in your hand over here, you'll see that there's a hammer cost and a saw cost on all these cards, giving you the way you can have your handful of cards, turn them into buildings on the board. All buildings cost the exact same much, all buildings give you the same number of points, but then they give you different benefits on the board depending on what you're doing over here. So this building over here, whenever you activate a saw cost, you can discard a card for 2 dudes. Whenever you activate a shovel, you can either take a tent, or you can pay into money to get 2 tents. So you can have all these different cards that you have the option to build, and trying to build out, manage your hand, draw more cards, and figure out what buildings are going to complement your pathway forward in the game is going to be a big part of the experience. From there we have this region over here, which is going to be how you move around this map. Whenever you get one of these wagon symbols, you get to move your wagon as far as the number of horses you've slowly built up. So you're going to start the game with a horse, and you can gather more horses, meaning you can move between as little as 1 as much as 6, taking all the benefits of the spots you cross off along the way. And you're trying to wander along this map, both to get benefits, but also because as you go to different regions on the map, you have the opportunity to put out different tents once you do this action over here, and tents are going to give you different number of victory points depending on how many of the 5 different regions you put a tent into. Then over here, we have how you put down tents. So over here, you're going to get a tent, assuming you did not bust, and then you can place down tents and meeples. Tents generally are going to go over here, or alternatively on these spots around the board, on these event circles, so you can double up your rewards. You can place down as many tents as you want with a single action, and you can also place out dudes, although that's a bit more limited. You can fill a single row of dudes at the corral over here by putting out a, with this dude's action, you can fill a single row of dudes, either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the more, the lower you go, but there are benefits to being higher on there when the shootout occurs at the end of a round. At the end of a full year, 5 rounds, you're going to have a shootout occurring. Which brings us to the actual tile over here. The barker tile is always rotating and always in play. This is going to give you a way to buy horses and tents. Again, prototype over here, some of these elements are changing, but you can have a way to get the tents and horses through the barker tile by paying for those. And these tiles over here give you barrels. Barrels are going to be these one-time benefits you can take over here, but they're going to add bandits to the shootout. So for example, I can go ahead and say, you know what, I really want to take a tent and place a tent, so we're going to go ahead and do that. But the downside of that is going to add two gangsters, 2 outlaws to that spot. We're going to place it with a new barrel over there, but now the outlaws are a bit hard to fight, which takes us to the end of the round. Because at the end of the round, you're going to go ahead and resolve a shootout at the OK Corral. I think it's the OK Corral. And you're going to look at this track over here. And then if you have more people than the gangsters over there, then you will win the shootout. And if you are tied or more, you'll win the shootout. If you have fewer, then you will lose the shootout. And you're also going to get points for each outlaw you kill. So you're going to start with this one. You're going to green's going to get a point. Then over here, we're going to have purple's getting 2 points. Then over here, we're going to have blue getting 2 points because at this point, all the gangsters are dead. So being closer up means you can possibly get those points because you get the first extra kill on them. The downside is you're placing fewer at a time in a single action. Over here, if the Cowboys do win, then the first, second, and third, and fourth place are going to get the points accordingly. And 0 just means if you have placed 0 people at the OK Corral, you're going to have a person die. And then over here on this side, you're still going to get better rewards if you won, or second or third, all that, but just lower rewards. So if the Cowboys didn't win, it's still in your interest to be first place, but just less so because there's less rewards being split around. And that's basically how a round of Coloma works. There's a few other things we didn't really talk about. First of all, busting, as I mentioned already, but the bust tile will always stay still unless there's a clear majority. And when you bust, you're going to move your markers on any number of bust tracks. Gold is something going to be taken from the market and can always be traded into pay costs. So for example, if I have 2 gold right now, because the lowest uncovered space is worth 2, these 2 gold are worth 4. You can pay that for costs, you don't get change. The tiles over here, the barrels as I mentioned already, you're going to be getting gangsters added to the board. Over here, you're going to be moving around this area over here, and you have little tiles on the edge from the expansion that are going to give you different benefits on them. So you're going to get those benefits and flip those tiles, and also get various cowboys, various dudes, various money, drawing cards, gold, all those things as you travel around the board over here. Down here, we have the number of cowboys that are going to start off in the OK Corral every single round. And then additionally, we have, I think that's primarily most things. There's going to be the hotel module, which I haven't shown you. That's a module from the base game you can add there. We have the character module, which is where everyone gets a unique character to their color, giving them an additional ability. Over here, I can give up a wagon movement to instead take a barrel if I want to. And those are going to be the general idea of how you play out the game. At the end of the round, then the full game, you're going to score all your incoming points that you've had throughout the course of the game. But you're also going to score points for your waterfalls, as listed on the player board over here. You're going to score points for your bridges. You're going to score points for how many of these over here you have over there. You're going to score points for, you know, the shootouts, you're going to get points for all of that. And then, of course, the buildings, all the buildings are going to be worth 6 points as well. And that's basically how you play Coloma. As far as what does the new process expansion add, what changes are there here? Because I kind of taught it to you as if it's the expansion and base game combined into one. As far as the changes the expansion brings, I'm going to cover most, but not necessarily all of them. First of all, you're going to have entirely new decks of cards. So the player decks of cards have been completely replaced with new cards, and the decks of cards are activated by the symbol, not just the action. In the base game, you'd be activated by the wheel only, but over here, you can be activated by the symbol, regardless of where you got that symbol, whether it's from a barrel, whether it's from the here, whether it's from a car, wherever you get the symbols from. You get a little bit more activation on your cards. You're also going to have you win ties at the OK Corral. Players who played Coloma will say, hey, you said you win on ties, you actually lose on ties. Well, no, you actually win on ties here. It's a little change to the game as far as how the rules work, but you do win on ties instead. But an extra cowboy has been added to ensure that you can't guarantee a win at the OK Corral. You're also going to have the waterfalls replacing streams. In the base game, you just had streams that will go on your board and give you a little reward on your player board. Now you can get those rewards as you move along this bus track and as you cross these various graveyards, but it replaces waterfalls, so it's a new element that goes onto your track over there. And then from there, you're also going to have these little these revised tiles over here are going to be added to the game, and then you're going to have tiles that go into this area over here as well. You're going to have a revised Barker tile giving you a few more barrels in the game, incentivizing more outlaws showing up across the course of the game. You also get points for killing outlaws, where normally you'd only get points for the first and second and third place and all that, but now because you get a point for each outlaw you kill, that makes this area a lot more competitive and a lot more strategic as far as diving into there. And that's most of the changes in the game. There are a few other small elements. I didn't go into a full breakdown of the changes, but the changes basically, the biggest change is that there's a stronger incentive on both the gunfights at the OK Corral, as well as the fact that there's more of a structure around busting in general, giving you more reasons, more compelling aspects as to why you might try to intentionally target busting in order to get various rewards along the way. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into the review, starting off with ease of play. There's a lot going on here. I probably should have focused on more of an overview and less of a rules thingy, but there's a lot going on in Coloma, a lot to learn, although it is very procedural to pick up. It's very simple to pick up. It goes through the core actions, kind of make sense. You teach the game, people understand it, and then after a few rounds of play, it starts to feel like it's all coming together. You kind of pick up all that information, and you're like, okay, there's a lot happening here. But as you're doing things, the primary idea, as like I said in the beginning, is you're gathering resources. You're gathering gold, you're gathering dudes, you're gathering cowboys, you're gathering money, and you're doing all of that to be able to get the cowboys to move on this map over here, which will give you a strong engine of income. And then past that, you're building the buildings, which will improve your tableau. You're building the bridges and as well as the waterfalls in order to get as many points as possible and to slightly improve your busting tableau. You're just trying to get those 4 resources and trade those resources in as efficiently as possible while being mindful of other things such as gathering barrels, getting points at the OK Corral, all of those things. It all comes together fairly quickly as far as understanding and grokking how the game system works. Games can run you around the 2-hour mark. I'd say a fast game can run you 90 minutes that, players who really know what's going on and are top of their game. But I'd say a more typical game is going to be 2, maybe even 2.5 hours as you play through this. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, Coloma does a very good job at feeling like you're trying to manage a lot and guess what other players are doing and trying to anticipate the things you need while being mindful of the fact that because of the busting mechanic, you can never guarantee what you're actually getting this round. Every single round, you're going to go ahead and take your dial, you're going to place that dial out, and you're going to try to think through what do other players want, what are their strategic advantages. You know that John at the table, John always likes building a step low, so he's almost certainly building buildings round one, and you get just enough extra goodies in the game that you could build both buildings round one. They actually give you extra cowboys, extra dudes, compared to the base game in New Prospects, and that means round one you can have a full double build if you plan it right, but that means other players are going to go there. And so do you plan around that? Maybe you want to bust. Maybe you're okay with that. Maybe you go somewhere else because maybe it's actually better to go ahead and get your horses up and running on the barker tile because then you'll start taking actions on the wagon train over there. So there's lots to consider as you try to think through what other players are going to do, both based on their tableau and cards and possibly character ability if you're using that module, or just based on their personality, based on knowing them in real life, and you're trying to think around that as you plan. And so there's a lot of guesswork around the action selection in this game, guesswork that is satisfying to go through. And you get stuff either way. It's just a question of, do you bust and possibly start moving along this track over here? Maybe you're focusing towards points or extra goodies. Maybe you buy a waterfall first and foremost right away so that you can ensure that you're already starting to take advantage of that as soon as the game begins. It will save you a lot of time in this track and ensure that you can actually move along this track a lot faster, and that can be very rewarding in its own right as you go through it. And so it's just rewarding to find those areas in the game and optimize it, because you do need to find those areas. Whether you're building out a bunch of cards that involve busting, whether you're building cards with the same symbol so you can keep activating them again and again, no matter what you do in the game, it's about finding your specific area of where you're stronger and optimizing around that. Get 6 horses as fast as possible and charge around the Doomtown. Gather as much gold as possible and trade that in for the buildings and waterfalls and bridges that you need. Do you focus purely on the gunfights, just trying to immediately get all your cowboys out there, all your dudes out to the gunfights as soon as possible, because that will ensure you get the first player points. It'll ensure that you kill all the cowboys as fast as possible. Trade them in for barrels. Try to ensure that, if you have a lot of cowboys over here, a lot of dudes here, you can also go ahead and take barrels, not worried as much about what will happen, because you're just going to kill 15 outlaws and get 15 points for that. That can be incredibly rewarding to get an extra 15 points on top of the already 6 or 3 or last round of game, the 10 points you're getting. And so there's a lot of things to manage as you go through it, as far as just finding where you're good at the game and trying to build out your tableau in your own way. It's a very rewarding, puzzly game of think through what you want, try to plan around it, know that you won't always be able to get everything, but you do get compensation sometimes. No matter what happens, you'll get some form of compensation as you go. It's a strong midweight Euro game that gives you just a lot to consider, but particularly a degree of reading the other players and ensuring that your plans both work for your strategy, but also have backup plans allowed within them. As far as what I don't like in the game, buildings don't often feel like you get enough use out of them. I find you have to really lean into the buildings to get a lot of use out of them, and I find that buildings also don't feel distinguished, which makes the game a little easier, and it makes it a little easier to manage things. The fact that every building costs the same much and gives the same much points means that there is a little bit less, nuance as far as trying to figure out exactly how to manage the buildings in my hand. So it makes the game a drop more accessible, but I think it takes away a little bit of the charm of, buying that cool building that's really useful and helpful because that building's really strong, but you have to save up more gold to be able to do it. And so the buildings, I find that they work and they add to your tableau, and they each worth 6 points as well, and that's going to add up in a game that gives you 100 to 140 points as an ending score. You're going to find that having buildings in general is 6 points a pop. You build 5 buildings, that's 30 points of your score right there. That's a decent chunk of your points, and it also adds to your tableau at the same time. But I do find that buildings don't get activated as much as I would like. I find when I play this game, I always want to work on buildings, and I lean into them less because I find other things tend to be more rewarding, or tend to feel like they're more rewarding. That's a big aspect as well. I can't say for sure what the balance is on this versus that. I can only say that when I play it, I feel like other areas feel more rewarding at times, and so I tend to lean into those, even though buildings normally are the kind of thing that I'd want. Also, the game feels like it suffers from slow action resolution in a way that's annoying because it almost feels like it shouldn't matter. Meaning, when you're trying to resolve this wheel, and when you have multiple people on this tile over here, you're going to be resolving them from one moving around the board. And most of the time, you can resolve things simultaneously. Most of the time. And so most of the time, it's not that big a deal to be like, hey, let's do things simultaneously to speed up the game. The problem is if you do that, inevitably there'll be that one time where somebody grabs a barrel and you're like, well, I wanted the barrel. And it does matter. The order of what you do in the game can matter, but it matters so little that it feels like you want to charge forward simultaneously, but it matters just enough that you kind of can't, which results in either resolving simultaneously and dealing with the fact that sometimes you have to kind of backward track, like, oh, okay, fine, okay, you can take the barrel. Would you actually have taken the barrel if you weren't? I don't know, maybe not, I don't really know. Or alternatively, you have to actually go slowly and slog through the action resolution, especially at higher player counts. Slogging through the action resolution isn't as much fun, and it's worse knowing that it's almost not necessary. It's necessary, but but almost not necessary. And so that slows down the game a little bit and lends itself to the longer, 2 hours or 2.5 hour playtime. And then lastly, I'll say that the game doesn't have the greatest iconography at certain times. And an example, I don't have examples in front of me over here, but there are examples as far as, things over here. This symbol over here means pay 1 gold to go ahead and get 3 points over here. That's intuitive enough, but there's times where that number's in green, and it still means to pay to get that resource. Over here, in this case, it doesn't really show a number at all. The iconography is a little bit inconsistent at times. So even over here, if we flip down this one over here, these symbols, this symbol over here means put down any number of tents anywhere you want in any way, shape, or form. As long as you have them, you can place them. And this symbol means place down a single row of outlaws, not multiple. And so those kinds of aspects, small little complaints around the iconography, I find it's not immediately consistent. It's not consistent, and it's not immediately intuitive as a result of that. It does mean that I find myself referencing things just to double check until you pick it up, until you're sure you know what you're doing over there. I recommend double checking the actual rules pamphlet. They have a nice little rules pamphlet. It's very helpful. It really gives you all the information you need. It's just that sometimes it's directly overruling what you would have thought the information was. As far as what I can see others not liking in Coloma, first of all, busting in and of itself in both directions is something that may or may not work for you in this game. The idea of trying to secretly bid around where to go in a Euro game and having your plans foiled by somebody else taking that same spot could be frustrating. The flip side is if you really enjoy that mechanic, then the way New Prospects gives you more ways to benefit from busting could be frustrating. The base game kind of gave you your cards. The building cards that were replaced in the base game, you had a handful of cards. You could build buildings that would help you in busting, and now it's kind of, you still have cards that will benefit from busting, but you have even more of an inbuilt tableau that will start you off the bat where you can benefit from turn 1 from busting. And so that one, either direction might not be for you. You might not like busting, and if you did like busting, you might not like the fact that there's enough compensation in place that sometimes you actively want to bust in the game. Additionally, there's a not as great, the game's not as great at lower player counts. Because of the nature of busting and conflict being a central premise to Coloma, I'd say that while it functions at 2, and there's a solo mode as well, I have not played the solo mode, but it functions at 2, but I find that for me, 3 to 4 players is where it thrives, and realistically even 4 is better. 3, there's going to be enough times where you're not even clashing enough at 3. 4 players is where I find it's best. 3 is good enough, and there's enough player interaction, and I enjoy it very much, and it's also a little faster. And 2 is where I just personally wouldn't pull it out as much, and again, I have not played the solo mode, so I can't talk about that. And that's basically what we have there. Which brings us to final thoughts. Before we do final thoughts, let's talk about what New Prospects adds. I think I covered this already. I covered this already in terms of there, so never mind. We can skip directly to final thoughts. Final thoughts on Coloma and New Prospects. And I'll give my thoughts on the full bundle. I don't think New Prospects heavily changed my mind on Coloma. I played Coloma years ago multiple times. I played it, I dove into it, and I enjoyed Coloma, but I felt Coloma, well, I like Coloma. I think Coloma is a rewarding game that gives you a lot to consider and lets you build up your tableau. The art and presentation is amazing. The theme is great and not overly done. The busting aspect over there, I really enjoy that little bit of mind think and trying to think through what other players are going to do and trying to predict how I can take care of it while I build out my own engine, while I try to avoid and dance around the other players, or possibly in New Prospects lean into it, especially if I'm trying to work my way up that chart, because you can get a lot of points. If you get to the end of this track over here, you can get a lot of points, but you really have to work your way to do it. And working your way to do it means trying to bust on a regular basis, and that's where the Barker comes into play, because the Barker is actually new in the sense that you're only adding the Barker after the tile, so that incentivizes busting in that spot. There's a lot of things to consider here, and overall it's a very satisfying game. I find that my biggest issue with it is that it does slow down in a way that becomes a little less satisfying because the length of the game feels disproportionate to how much fun I get out of it. And that's also true with the buildings as well. The buildings I find are a little less satisfying. An area that normally for me I'm all for. I want to build up my buildings and get as many things going as possible. I find in Coloma I tend to build like 2 or 3 buildings and really focus on my waterfalls and bridges there, because that's where a chunk of the points are going to come in. And the game isn't necessarily long enough. With only 3 rounds of play, you're only going to be activating these sites over here 15 times throughout the course of the game. There's 15 turns, 15 rounds across those 3 years, and so there's not a ton of being able to really fully build out a tableau, and the game is long enough as it is. So I like Coloma. I enjoy Coloma, but I find that I tend to be pulled a bit more for the game weight and for what it's doing. I either want something meatier with a lot more going on, or alternatively something that plays in, half an hour to an hour less. For me, this is a 3.5 out of 5. I definitely enjoy Coloma, definitely recommend it. I've had a lot of fun with it, but it's not one of those games that gets me. I think the trade-off of the length of the game versus what it's doing versus what I get out of it means it's really good, but it's just shy of where I want it to be. As far as the expansion, I was hoping the expansion would add a lot more for me, and I like the expansion. I do. I think that the new busting mechanic and the addition of waterfalls instead of streams, it's just more interesting. The original building deck versus the new building deck, I don't know if I strongly feel a big difference there, and at least not yet. The addition of having bust over there, making it more likely you bust over there, as well as having the shootout. I like the shootouts a lot. The shootouts are a lot more. There's a lot more reason to dive into the shootouts in the expansion compared to the original base game, where I found people didn't resonate to go there quite as much because there were fewer points being divvied up there. And so I really like the how they made the shootouts are much more focused, and I like the fact that the busting has more of a benefit. So I think new prospects, definite improvements for the game, but I don't know if it overall changes where it is for me. I think it's a 3.5 for me with or without the expansion, although the expansion does do some nice things. In any case, as far as other game recommendations, first of all, Coimbra. If you're looking for a game that kind of gives you this little puzzly sideboard of moving around the game while dealing with the Euro engine, that I think to me gives me a better ratio of the complexity and length and game time, Coloma for me is one of my favorite Euro games in this genre. And if you're looking for kind of the fight out kind of sequence over here that you have going on, where you're trying to throw people into this fight to try to get as many points as possible, that's very similar to Dune Imperium. Gave me strong Dune Imperium vibes as far as the little side puzzle of dealing with a little side shootout while you work on your Euro engine and semi-worker placement in these two games. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you found this video helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.